The city was on fire. Not a small fire. Not an accident. 7 days. 7 days of flames swallowing streets, temples, markets, and homes. 1 million people watched everything they knew turn to ash. And at the center of it all, one man stood and did nothing. Or so the story goes. Because what history remembers about Nero is not always what history got right. Welcome to Epoch Stories. If you're new here, this channel is where history stops being a textbook and starts being a story worth telling. And if you've been here before, you already know we don't do surface level. We go deep. We find the parts they left out. So whether this is your first time or you're back for more, I'm glad you're here. Today, we are stepping into one of the most dramatic, most debated, and most misunderstood moments in Roman history. The Great Fire of Rome, the emperor at the center of it, the conspiracy theories that followed, the persecution that changed the world, and the real question that historians are still arguing about to this day. Did Nero actually do it? Buckle up, because this story is nothing like what you learned in school. It is July 64 AD. Rome is the greatest city on earth. Over 1 million people packed into narrow, winding streets, wooden buildings stacked shoulder to shoulder, markets overflowing, temples gleaming with gold. It is loud, alive, and magnificent. And then, in the dead of night, a flame sparks near the Circus Maximus. Nobody thinks much of it at first. Fires happen in Rome. The city is old and crowded and careless. But this fire does not stop. It spreads block by block, swallowing alleyways, jumping across rooftops, racing through markets with a hunger that nothing seems to slow. By morning, entire neighborhoods are gone. By the second day, people are running with whatever they can carry. By the third day, Rome is unrecognizable. 6 of Rome's 14 districts are completely destroyed. 3 more are left in scorched ruins. The fire burns for 6 days before it slows, then somehow reignites and burns for 3 more. 9 days total. And when it is finally over, the heart of the greatest empire the world had ever known is a graveyard of ash and rubble. Now here is where the story gets complicated, because almost immediately the whispers started. People looked around at the smoldering ruins of their city, and they asked one question. Where was the emperor? Nero was in Antium, about 30 miles from Rome, when the fire broke out. That much is agreed upon. But what happened next depends entirely on who you believe. The Roman historian Tacitus, writing decades later, tells us that Nero rushed back to Rome when he heard the news, that he opened his own gardens to the homeless, that he brought in food supplies from neighboring towns and dropped the price of grain so the poor could eat, that he personally oversaw relief efforts and began drawing up plans to rebuild the city, wider streets this time, stone buildings instead of wood, a Rome that could never burn like this again. That is one version. The other version spread through the city like the fire itself. Nero said it. He wanted to clear land for a massive new palace complex he had been dreaming about. He sent men with torches into those narrow streets. And while Rome screamed, Nero stood on a tower, dressed in his stage costume, and sang. He performed his own poetry about the fall of Troy, playing his lyre while the city below him collapsed into flames. That is the image that survived. The emperor fiddling while Rome burned. But here is what most people do not know. The fiddle did not even exist in ancient Rome. That detail alone tells you something about how much of this story was shaped not by facts, but by fury. The truth about Nero is more unsettling than either version, because it lives somewhere in the middle, and the middle is always harder to hold on to than a clean villain. Nero was 26 years old when Rome burned. He had been emperor since he was 17, handed power by a mother who had poisoned his predecessor to put her son on the throne. His mother was Agrippina the Younger, one of the most calculating women in Roman history. She controlled him, advised him, and by most accounts terrified him. So what did Nero do? He had her killed. He also killed his first wife. He kicked his second wife so hard while she was pregnant that she died. He executed senators. He murdered rivals. He spent money Rome did not have on art, performance, and spectacle. He believed himself to be a great artist, a poet, a musician, and he forced the Roman elite to sit through his performances and applaud. This was the man sitting on the throne when Rome caught fire. So when people look for someone to blame, Nero was not exactly starting from a position of trust. And here is where the story takes a turn that changed the course of human history. Nero needed a scapegoat. The rumors about him were spreading too fast and hitting too close. He needed to redirect the anger of a million displaced, grieving, furious Romans. He needed someone to blame. He chose the Christians. At this point in history, Christianity was barely 30 years old. It was a small, misunderstood sect that most Romans found strange and suspicious. They met in private. They refused to worship Roman gods. They spoke about a kingdom that was not Rome. In a city looking for someone to blame, they were the perfect target. Nero accused the Christians of starting the fire, and then he punished them in ways that even some Romans found difficult to watch. Christians were sewn into animal skins and torn apart by dogs in the arena. They were crucified. They were covered in tar and set on fire to serve as human torches to light Nero's garden parties at night. Tacitus, who had no love for Christians himself, wrote that even though the Christians were guilty in the eyes of the public, the cruelty of the punishment stirred something like pity in the Roman people, because what Nero was doing did not feel like justice. It felt like entertainment. Among those executed during this persecution, according to early Christian tradition, were two men named Peter and Paul, two of the most important figures in the history of Christianity, killed in Rome under Nero's reign. If Nero thought he was erasing a movement, he was wrong. The persecution did not destroy Christianity. It scattered it, strengthened it, and gave it martyrs whose stories would outlive the empire itself. Now is a good time to pause and say this. If this kind of storytelling is doing something for you, if you're learning things you never heard before, if this feels different from the history you sat through in school, then do me a favor. Hit that like button. Drop a comment below telling me what you think about Nero. Was he a monster, a scapegoat, or something in between? And if you're not subscribed yet, now is the time. There's a lot more where this came from. Back to Rome. Nero did rebuild the city. The new Rome that rose from the ashes was genuinely more organized, more fire-resistant, wider streets, better access for firefighting. By any practical measure, the rebuilt Rome was superior to what had burned. And Nero did build his palace. The Domus Aurea, the Golden House, a staggering complex stretching across hundreds of acres of prime Roman land that had conveniently been cleared by the fire. Inside, the walls were covered in gold and ivory. There were rotating dining rooms, fountains, artificial lakes. At the entrance stood a colossal bronze statue of Nero himself, over 100 feet tall. The Romans looked at all of this and they remembered the whispers. Nero's reign unraveled slowly and then all at once. Rebellions broke out across the empire. The Senate turned against him. His generals refused to defend him. In 68 AD, just 4 years after the fire, Nero found himself alone, abandoned, and hunted. He fled Rome in disguise. He hid in a villa outside the city. And when he heard the sound of approaching horsemen sent to arrest him, he did what the man who had executed so many others could not bear to face himself. He took his own life. His last words, according to the ancient sources, were these: "When an artist dies in me." Not a plea, not a confession, not a prayer, just a man, to the very end, convinced that the world was losing something irreplaceable when it lost him. He was 30 years old. 2,000 years later, we are still arguing about him. Was Nero the monster who burned his own city for space to build a palace? Or was he a paranoid, unstable young man who inherited an empire he was never prepared for and spent his reign drowning in it? Was the fire his doing? Or was he simply unlucky enough to be emperor when Rome's overcrowded, fire-prone streets finally caught up with themselves? The honest answer is that we do not know. The sources that survived were written by men who despised him. The truth, as it so often does, burned along with the city. What we do know is this: the Great Fire of Rome changed everything. It gave Nero a legacy he could never escape. It gave Christianity its first martyrs. And it gave history one of its most enduring images: an emperor in the glow of a burning city, playing music while his world collapsed. Whether that image is real or invented, It has lasted longer than the empire itself. And maybe that is the most Roman thing about this whole story.